Israel's most famous poet was a man named Yehuda Amichai. He was born in Germany in 1924 and moved with his family to British Mandate Palestine in 1936. Among his massive collection of poems is, I think, my favorite, Hamakom Shebo Anu Tzodkim. In English, the place where we are right. And these are his words, translated. From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. From the place where we are right, that place is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plow, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. Amichai is describing two different kinds of places, metaphorical, emotional, relational places. One is the place where we are right, and the other is the place where we give voice to doubts and loves, where we are not seeking just to be right so much as to be seen, to be understood. The place where we are right, where we care only about winning an argument and undermining someone else's, that place is barren, he says. No flowers grow there, even in the spring. It is hard, it is trampled, only crushed earth beneath the mighty weight of our rightness. But doubts and loves, the building blocks of our stories, in which we are always uncertain and striving, those act like a plow on the ground, and they can create a whisper of tomorrow, where today there is only silence or screaming. Amichai's poem is with me most of the time in my work as a rabbi because I am privileged, so privileged, to know so many of your stories. You graciously share your doubts and loves with me, and I learn so much about our shared humanity from you. In my experience as a pastor, not to mention as a wife and a mother and a daughter and a sister and a friend, Amichai's poems are prophetic, vying for rightness, while sometimes necessary, feeds an alienation between people that only the sharing of doubts and loves and fears and dreams and hopes can mend. I thought of his poem as I stood outside the Uptown JCC a few weeks ago, waiting to hear the words of former Israeli hostage Omer Shem Tov, who was taken captive at the Nova Music Festival at 20 years old and held for 505 days by Hamas in the dark, suffocating tunnels under Gaza. As many here may recall, because there were hundreds of us there in attendance to hear his story, a small crowd gathered on the neutral ground to harass us as we went inside, shouting at us that we, whom they had identified as Zionists, a word that clearly they viewed as synonymous with pure evil, that we should, well, I won't sully the bima with the vile ugliness that they chose to spew. I am certain they believed they were right. But so was Amichai. Just as nothing grows in the barren earth of self-righteousness, so too nothing productive emerged from that brief and cynical confrontation, nor any others like it that we have seen. No life was saved, no hostage freed, no food delivered, just more brokenness and alienation between neighbors. That moment that many of us may have shared, which was more meme than anything, was emblematic of the ways that we are, as a society, struggling to have our hardest and most urgent conversations. The pockets of our existence where we seem to be able to see and relate to each other across a great chasm of disagreement, those are few and far between. Many of us fear and resist our most pressing conversations, both personal and political, because they necessitate the vulnerable sharing of doubts and fears rather than fighting for rightness. And that fear that we feel, while understandable, is giving way to a moral lapse within and amongst us. Without taking more of these chances to come down from the arid high ground of self-righteousness and being willing to dig into the soil of someone else's perspective, we will not be able to hear a whisper of a brighter future. That whisper that we don't hear now, that whisper comes only as the sacred music which flows from sharing each other's doubts and loves and bringing human stories into relationship with each other. Without creating space for that whisper of connection and empathy, we will not be able to move from the place where we can see, from this place to a place where we can see the tiny glints of light of a brighter tomorrow. I want to share with you and talk with you tonight about the places that I see this happening. I see it happening in our national life. And of course, it happens in our families and even inside our own selves. I'd like, before we go into some of those, for you to pause and think of moments that you associate with this idea, where an interaction with someone who is in your life stays in a place where you both are right and never moves to the place where doubts and loves till up the soil. I suspect that everyone can think of that moment, or many of them. We all have many of them. And as your rabbi, I also see it happening within our Jewish community, globally and locally, and between our community and allies and neighbors. And it makes me worried about the future that we are trying to build, because we must move from here. This is not the world that we wish to see. Since tonight is Kol Nidre, our night of coming to terms with ourselves, let us consider what are some of those hardest and most urgent conversations that we need to have as a Jewish community. Conversations that frighten us so that we would prefer silence or screams to the whisper of tomorrow. Conversations where we are all so sure that we are right, and where our rightness drowns out the song of new possibilities. We need to talk about these, not because we wish to hurt each other. We need to talk about them because we all want to move from here. Firstly, the Jewish response to October 7th and the Gaza war at this moment. We have all come to understand the magnitude of Hamas's depravity during the last 2 years. They launched a war on October 7th in the most brutal and barbaric fashion, including the taking of hostages. But first, they spent over 15 years and billions of dollars constructing 500 plus kilometers of concrete tunnels under Gaza with entrances and infrastructure built into many homes and mosques and school buildings and hospitals. This strategy did exactly what it was designed to do, which is to force Israel to conduct a war against Hamas that would require massive civilian casualties and harm to get to them. And that is what has happened. Some argue that it is right to do whatever it takes to defeat Hamas, even if it means inflicting catastrophic destruction, that these actions today will save lives in the future. And this is in fact the only path to a different reality for the region. There can be no future without this defeat of Hamas. Some argue that the human price of defeating Hamas now, thousands of Gazan civilian lives, including so many precious children, the loss of so many brave young soldiers, both on the battlefield and later due to post-traumatic stress, the agony of the hostage families, and hundreds of thousands with them, marching and advocating relentlessly that their loved ones not be forgotten. Some argue that it is simply too high a price to pay and impossible to justify in this moment. The list of arguments goes on, and because we believe in accountability as a religious practice, that's what we're all doing here tonight, we must be able to ask ourselves what I believe is the most relevant question for us now. How do we approach the reality tomorrow to pick up the pieces of all that we have suffered as a people and at the same time come to terms with all the suffering that this war has wrought on Palestinian lives? What does that cheshbon nefesh, that moral accounting, so necessary in the wake of so many shattered lives, what does that look like for us as a Jewish people? For Israel, for Americans who love Israel, as I do, and as I know many of you do, what will that be like? We have never done that before. And we need each other for this conversation, not just to be right or to be wrong, but to talk about doubts and loves and hopes and dreams and teshuvah. As we all wait with bated breath for Hamas's answer on the deal that is on the table, accepted by Israel and backed by America, and most importantly, the significant Arab and Muslim entities in the region, we must engage with these questions beyond rightness. And that will require actually talking about values and hopes and dreams and doubts and loves. We also need to talk about the misunderstanding of Zionism and what tomorrow's Zionism will be like. In the Western Hemisphere, we are right to marvel at the liberal democracy that is the United States of America and how it has enabled our Jewish community to crash through glass ceilings that other Jews in any other time and place in history could never have imagined. In the context of this country, we have been able to be proudly Jewish in every city and town. We light menorahs in public parks. We establish Jewish institutions that have mobilized our community to rescue and help other Jews from around the world. Many of you in this room have done that work or are recipients of it. And even, and this is the most unthinkable part, we have even been able to harness the powerful prophetic voice within Judaism to share our safety and security and resources and power with other groups that have even less agency and self-determination than we do. That was never true before, ever, in the history of the world. In doing so, in seizing this moment in our country, we have built a new kind of Judaism that has made the world a better place. And we are right to acknowledge that it is different in the Eastern Hemisphere of this world. Liberal democracies that were willing to protect the lives of minorities like Jews were nowhere to be found, certainly not in Europe, as we know only too well in the wake of its systematic murder of 1/3 of our entire global population within about 5 years during the Shoah. And because of the steady stream of expulsions and pogroms and slaughters for the 1,500 years before that. And it did not exist in major Jewish population centers in the Middle East and Africa, where our existence was always precarious, and where tribes and empires, rather than nation states with guaranteed rights of citizenship, were the governing entities. It was impossible to flee these places for America at the most crucial times because of the quotas on Jewish immigration. And so the choices that would ensure survival of Jews and Judaism were limited. Zionism and national sovereignty became a vehicle of our aspirational mandate, that the Jewish people could be agents of our own destiny, freed from the constant threat of violence and near constant experience of victimhood, and able to protect ourselves, fully express our rich national culture, speak our ancient languages, and use our millennia-long training in moral imagination to be a force for good in the world through the vehicle of a sovereign state in our ancestral homeland. And the creation of that state has resulted in the dislocation and in some cases persecution of another people who also call that land home. a people who also deserve to be free from the constant experience of victimhood and able to protect themselves, to fully express their rich culture, and who have a right to self-determination no less than we. Somehow, we must discern how Zionism evolves to recommit itself to its aspirational roots, which were not love of power for power's sake, but love of agency and love of responsibility, and not just for itself, but for the entire world. We need each other for this conversation of what Zionism will be in the next generation, not to be right or wrong, but to talk about hopes and dreams and fears and doubts and loves. And we must talk about the complexity of our institutional involvements with these causes. In recent years, and those of us who love Israel and stay close to it have watched this, we know this, there has been growing empowerment of Jewish messianic extremism in the Israeli government. Empowerment that some of our Jewish institutions and fellow Jews actively, or often not actively but implicitly, have condoned because of the ways that we are all linked in a broad ecosystem. For those who do not condone, there is a feeling of powerlessness to stop what we know is a desecration of our Jewish values on the world stage. Loyalty is important, especially when we are surrounded by so many people and forces that have disdain for us as a Jewish community. But we may be letting that need for express loyalty to actually divorce us from the commitments we have always held dear and that we have deeply loved about America and about Israel. Liberal democratic values are baked into Israel's Declaration of Independence. It is an inspiring document. If you do not know what it says, please take time to read it. And that vision of Zionism, that one that was aspirational about building a just society for all its citizens, that is the vision of Zionism that won the day. That's why the Declaration of Independence reads the way that it does. It was not the only version of Zionism. It was the one that won at the time. There were always other visions of what the Jewish national project might be, including a messianic quest to conquer all the land of our ancient people, to settle it, and to live as our ancestors did, and even to rebuild the third temple. That is not our vision. It has never been, and it is not the vision of most Israelis, not even close. It's also, with its proponents gaining power, gaining political power, and gaining a spotlight, having seats in the Knesset, having important ministries in the government, they are deigning to speak to the world on behalf of all of us. What are we to do? It has been very hard for Jewish advocacy organizations and prominent American Jewish leaders and philanthropists with broad constituencies to find the right words at the right time to express what many of us are thinking, which is that these extremists do not speak for us. They do not represent our Judaism. They bring shame upon us with their inhumanity and their zealotry and their overt racism. We feel all of this, and yet working on how to build it into our most important institutions is incredibly fraught, because the world seizes upon every internal rebuke we might offer ourselves. Every hint of vulnerability is weaponized by anti-Semites and by those anti-Zionists who don't care if any Israelis or Jews live to see another decade. How are we to engage in a principled critique of our Jewish organizational and philanthropic infrastructure so that we support and advocate for and teach and communicate with the world as Jews in keeping with our most cherished Jewish commitments, and that we support our partners, so many partners in Israel who are holding that line every single day? And how do we do it, staying true to ourselves, even at the risk of giving anti-Semitic movements, of which there are many and they are growing, more fodder for their hate of all of us? How do we even begin to talking about this if we don't let our guard down, at least among each other? We need each other for this conversation, not to be right and wrong, but to share wisdom and ideas and to talk about doubts and loves and to find and amplify our partners. These are some of the biggest questions we are asking ourselves as a Jewish community and as a people. Yes, they can all be conversations about rightness. I am quite sure you would realize that I'm right if we talked about it for long enough. And I bet that you feel the same. But the truth is that we have no precedent in Jewish history for a moment like this, an era in which Jews have never been as self-actualized and safe, and yet where rising extremism and declining liberal values surround us in almost every corner of the globe that brought us that safety, that emancipation, that confidence, where violent hatred against us is festering in new ways and poisoning an entire generation and beyond. These conversations that our global and local Jewish community must have require courage and vulnerability, listening and sharing, learning and growing. They require moral imagination that is unbound by the brittle confines of rightness if we are to whisper of tomorrow. Our tradition is based predominantly upon law. Each of the 613 commandments in the Torah, these mitzvot, are laws, clear, often specific instructions for how and when we should take a certain action or how and when we should not take a certain action. But the law that is repeated more often than any other is some version of the following: You shall not wrong or oppress the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. This instruction does not have the same clean edges as many of the other laws we receive. Rather, it is a commandment to an orientation to the world, to empathy, moral imagination, which can only happen in the context of relationship, a willingness to admit that one another's stories and perspectives matter. This exercise of empathetic visioning, of seeing ourselves in another person and sharing enough that they can see themselves in us, is the other way, besides law, that we as Jews are taught to discern morality. We do not have laws for every single thing, but we have 36 separate mentions of the law that says, encounter the other, even if they are very different from you, share your stories, find something you can relate to, and then derive the best moral course of action you can. Repetition in the Torah always means something. No word or phrase is superfluous, our rabbis teach. So what can it mean that we have this law repeated so many times? I suggest it means that God knows that this is very hard, that it requires risk from each of us to live this way, that it must be a practice, not an isolated action, that we will have to pursue it as a lifestyle every single day, even when we are not sure we're up to the task. In the Talmud, in Tractate Bava Metzia, the sages famously are having an argument in the Beit Midrash, and there is a hard conversation and a strong disagreement between Rabbi Eliezer and his fellow rabbis who are there. And to affirm his own rightness, Rabbi Eliezer begins to perform magic tricks, basically, like causing a stream to flow backwards, or even causing the walls of the Beit Midrash to sort of collapse and shake. To prove that he is right about this technicality, he even calls upon heaven, on God, to prove that he is right. And this bat kol, as it is called, this heavenly voice, cries out upon this request from Rabbi Eliezer that indeed he is right. It seems that this should surely settle the matter. A voice from on high has weighed in. But then, a different rabbi, Rabbi Yehoshua, quotes a verse from the Torah portion that Rabbi Silverman will read tomorrow. Lo bashamayim he cries out. It is not in heaven. His meaning is the following. This power to make decisions and change our minds, it does not reside in heaven or with God any longer. Torah and wisdom was given to us, and it is now our responsibility to interpret it. And God, after having been essentially told to butt out of human affairs, is proud. My children have triumphed over me, God says with a smile in this midrash. This is a famous and astonishing and perplexing Talmudic passage. The Torah was given to us, to the Jewish people, to humanity, and now it's ours to do with as we see fit. That means that God isn't only concerned with our rightness either, because if God was only concerned with our rightness, God would not have given this to us, and we would not be reading Lo Bashamayim Hi. God gave us wisdom in our tradition and refutes the idea that there is only one path to rightness anyway. From the place that we are right, nothing grows. And yet, aspirational living is what Judaism is all about. It is what our Torah and the covenant of Sinai demand of us. It is why we have spent 2,000 years writing and reading and teaching and practicing, so that we never, ever stop growing. We never stay in one place, not physically, but spiritually, emotionally, psychically, deepening our moral and spiritual existence and refining our character all the time. Living only on the hard turf of rightness rather than messily tilling the soil with our own doubts and loves, it's sad, it's lonely, but there's something more urgent about it. From the point of view of our Jewish tradition, not hearing each other's stories and not seeking to find common ground threatens the entire Jewish project of strengthening the moral fabric of our lives. So it is not just that it would be nice to move on from this barren place. If we're going to live good lives and steward this moment of power and pain and with integrity worthy of our inheritance, we have to move. We have to move forward. This passage that Rabbi Yehoshua quotes to put the bat kol in its place and to rebuke Rabbi Eliezer is more expansive than what is in the Talmudic passage, though. And in closing, I'd like to share it. Here it is in its entirety, and we will hear it tomorrow morning. Surely this instruction, this mitzvah, which I enjoin upon you today, it is not too baffling for you, nor is it beyond your reach. It is not in the heavens, lo bashamayim hi, that you should say, who among us can go up to the heavens and get it for us and impart it to us, that we may get it right. Neither is it beyond the sea, lo me'ever hayam hi, that you should say, who among us can cross over to the other side of the sea and get it for us and teach it to us so that we can get it right? Ki karov elecha hadavar me'od, beficha ubilvavcha la'asoto. This thing, this mitzvah, this state of being that you wish to experience, it's very close to you. It is already in your mouth and in your heart that you should observe it. This Torah and sacred textual tradition that has shaped us, the sources of building blocks for righteous living that we are commanded to seek throughout our lives, and especially to recommit to on Yom Kippur, it is not in heaven, it is not far away, but rather it is in our mouths and in our hearts. Rabbi Eliezer's mistake in the Talmud was in not understanding that, was in thinking that the only goal is to be right. And to that end, he demanded divine intervention to prove to the other sages that his view was correct, and in doing so, he was blind to the wisdom that surrounded him and refused to learn from the Torah that flowed from the hearts and the mouths of his fellow sages. When we behave that way and assume that kind of blindness, we cause the very walls of our world to shake and tremble. We endanger everyone around us. So our quest is to remember what he forgot. If this profound wisdom we seek that is supposed to teach us how to live a good life in the most morally complex circumstances ever encountered by Jews in the history of the world, if that is lo bashamayim, if it is not in heaven, it must be here on earth, hiding in plain sight, in the mouths and the hearts of humanity, where God has placed it long ago. And our lifelong quest is to seek it out each and every day, the Torah of each and every human being, not to vanquish it with our rightness, but to use it as seeds of a better future. The actual implications of this teaching from Devarim, from Deuteronomy, are potentially disastrous, and we know that. We can see it. We are left alone here in this world to figure it all out, knowing that God is not going to stop us from making mistakes. What kind of world does that build? This kind. The kind of world where the sources of our wisdom are not only bashamayim, they are not only up there, but rather bequeathed on Mount Sinai into our faulty human hands, implanted in our fallible human hearts and mouths, and everyone else's. It's also a world, though, where we have a religious duty not to mindlessly go along with a culture that seeks to silence stories and tells us that even hearing the loves and doubts of someone who is outside our camp is somehow a betrayal. If we don't make this move, if we don't try to make this change in ourselves, and if we don't amplify leaders here and over there that understand that this is the way forward, we are shutting off our most urgent portal through which we can make our way to that whisper of a future where the ruined house once stood. That whisper that says the following, and it digs up the world like a plow. My story matters, and so does yours. Our doubts and loves are inextricably linked, and I know that. The wisdom I seek, the script I am meant to follow in this life is not only in heaven, but it also lives in you. And your script lives in me. And if you can hear my whisper and I can hear yours, then together we can make the past hurt less and the future shine more. This kind of vulnerability and courageous humility is hard. It is heartbreaking. It will be heartbreaking. We will have to look into each other's eyes and see pain and see fear and see doubt and love, see the tiniest flicker of hope. But this brokenheartedness that comes from encounter is actually the glue that keeps our souls intact and the sticky, muddy mess that can rebuild the ruins of our earthly home. Gemar Chatima Tova.